Okay, guys, here we are with Officer Spence Makes No Sense, Part 3. So, when we left the last time, Arlo was pulling the fire alarm. Remember, do not ever do this at school or any public building. It's actually against the law to do that if there's not a real fire. Chapter 9, Officer Spence is getting weirder. Bring, 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 bring. Fire alarm bells always go bring, 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 bring. Nobody knows why. It was really loud. We had to hold our hands over our ears. Everybody was freaking out. It was cool. Get outside! People were screaming in the hallways. Fire! Everybody get outside! When we got out to the playground, it was like a war zone. Officer Spence had put barbed wire on top of the fence. There was a helicopter hovering over the school. Officer Spence was wearing a camouflage suit, and he was running around with a weird helmet over his face. What's that he's wearing? Ryan asked. Night vision goggles, Michael told us. They let you see in the dark. I saw them in a movie once. Night vision goggles are cool, I said. But why is he wearing night vision goggles in the middle of the day? Asked Neil. Because he's crazy, Andrea said. Officer Spence was running around, arresting every grown-up he could find. First, he ran over to our science teacher, Mr. Docker. Freeze, dirtbag, he yelled. What did I do? Asked Mr. Docker. You're conducting bizarre experiments in the science lab, Officer Spence said. You're under arrest. He put handcuffs on Mr. Docker. Then he ran over to our bus driver, Mrs. Cormell. Freeze, dirtbag! What did I do? She asked. I saw you drinking and driving, accused Officer Spence. It was coffee, said Mrs. Cormell. Yes, and you were drinking it, Officer Spence said as he handcuffed her. Drinking and driving is against the law, so you're under arrest. Then he ran over to our crossing guard, Mr. Louie. He was holding his guitar that looks like a stop sign. Freeze, dirtbag! Hey, man, said Mr. Louie, making a peace sign. Can't we all learn to love one another and live in peace and harmony? No, Officer Spence barked. You're under arrest. Hey, I'm just chillin', dude, Mr. Louie said. Doing my thing. Can you dig it? Why are you hassling me, bro? Because you stand out in the middle of the street before and after school, Officer Spence said. Yeah, that's my job, man, Mr. Louie said. I'm a crossing guard. I gotta help the kids cross the street. It's what I do. Can you dig where I'm coming from? You're a jaywalker, Officer Spence yelled, and you're going to jail. Oh, man, Mr. Louie said as he was handcuffed. Lighten up, dude. You're giving off bad vibes and bumming everybody out. You have the right to remain silent, said Officer Spence, so shut up. No, help me. Let me go. Chapter 10, The Peanut Butter and Jelly Bandit is... Officer Spence ordered us kids to go back inside the school and wait for him in the all-purpose room. That's a room we use for all purposes, so it has the perfect name. I looked at the clock as we went into school. It was almost 3 o'clock. Soon it would be time to go home. We got to the all-purpose room and it was amazing. The whole stage was filled with a long line of jail cells. Each one had a different grown-up in it. Mrs. Rupee, Mrs. Yonkers, Miss Hannah, Mr. Loring, Miss Small. They were all there. Wow, we said, which is Mom upside down. Help! Help! Let us out! The teachers were yelling and rattling their cages. Officer Spence is crazy! You have the right to remain silent, Officer Spence yelled at them, so shut up. I had to admit, the whole thing was pretty cool. It was a lot like going to the zoo, except there were teachers in the cages instead of monkeys, bears, and baboons. It was a real Kodak moment. You should have been there. There aren't any more grown-ups for Officer Spence to arrest, Ryan whispered. What's he gonna do now? Beats me, I said. Officer Spence climbed up on the stage and grabbed the microphone. Okay, I've looked over all the evidence, he announced. I examined fingerprints. I looked at hair samples under a microscope. I got the results of the DNA tests, and now I know the truth. I know who the guilty party is. The peanut butter and jelly bandit is... I leaned forward in my seat. We all leaned forward in our seats. It was really suspenseful. Everybody got quiet. You could hear a pin drop. but not one of those little pins you use for sewing clothes. Those pins don't make any noise when you drop them. I tried that once, and I couldn't hear it at all. I mean, like a bowling pin, because they make a lot of noise when they drop. Bowling is fun. I got a 109 once. I'm going bowling on Saturday because I got invited to Neil the Nude Kid's birthday party. They're going to put up bumpers so we can't throw any gutter balls. But that doesn't have anything to do with all the suspense that was in the all-purpose room. The peanut butter and jelly bandit is... Officer Spence didn't have the chance to finish his sentence because at that moment the most amazing thing in the history of the world happened. But I'm not going to tell you what it was. Okay, I'll tell you. But you have to read the next chapter to find out. So na-na-na-na-boo-boo on you. Chapter 11. Skippy and Jif save the day. Officer Spence was about to name the peanut butter and jelly bandit when we heard this loud grinding noise. It sounded like it was coming from under the stage. Then there was a banging noise. Bang, bang, bang. And then right next to Officer Spence, this thing popped up from under the stage. It was tan-colored, and it looked like a balloon or a beach ball or something. A tan-colored beach ball is coming through the floor, I hollered. No, I think it's a giant sea serpent, yelled Ryan. It looks like an enormous light bulb, shouted Michael. Run for your lives, screamed Neil the Nude Kid. But then we all realized that the thing was coming up through the floor wasn't a balloon or a beach ball or a giant sea serpent or an enormous light bulb. You'll never believe in a million, jillion, 100 years what it was. It was Mr. Klutz's shiny bald head. Our principal, Mr. Klutz, climbed out from under the stage. He was wearing a prison uniform. Hooray for Mr. Klutz, all the teachers shouted. Coming up right behind Mr. Klutz was our vice principal, Mrs. Jaffe. She was wearing a prison uniform too, and she had 2 dogs with her. We thought you were in jail, shouted Michael. We were in jail, you betcha, Mrs. Jaffe said. We tunneled out using our yogurt spoons. I'm starved, said Mr. Klutz. Does anybody have any yogurt? Officer Spence looked really mad. He wheeled around and pointed his finger at Mr. Klutz and Mrs. Jaffe like it was a gun. Freeze, dirtbags, he yelled. You're under arrest again. In fact, you're all under arrest. All of us? Asked Andrea. That's right, Officer Spence said. Kids, too. The whole school. Everybody's under arrest. You're all going to jail. Hands up. 400 kids put our hands in the air. Mrs. Jaffe's dogs started nosing around the stage like they were trying to smell something. What cute dogs, said Andrea, who never misses the chance to brown-nose a grown-up. What are their names? Skippy and Jif, said Mrs. Jaffe. They're peanut butter sniffing dogs. Peanut butter sniffing dogs? I heard of dogs that sniff out bombs. I heard of dogs that sniff out drugs, but I never heard of dogs that sniff out peanut butter. Maybe Mrs. Jaffe was yanking our chain. Where did you get your peanut butter sniffing dogs? Asked Emily. From Rent a Peanut Butter Sniffing Dog, said Mr. Klutz. You can rent anything. Ruff, barked Skippy. Get those dogs out of here, shouted Officer Spence. You can't have dogs in school. The dogs were sniffing all around Officer Spence. Ruff, barked Jif. You dogs are under arrest, Officer Spence yelled. Put your paws up. You have the right to remain silent. But Officer Spence didn't have the chance to finish his sentence because suddenly Skippy pulled something out of Officer Spence's pocket. It was a sandwich. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Everybody gasped. Oh, snap, said Ryan. How did that get in my pocket? Asked Officer Spence. Who put it in there? I'll tell you who put it in there, Mr. Klutz said. You put it in there because you, Officer Spence, are the real peanut butter and jelly bandit. Everybody gasped again. I didn't see that coming, Ryan said to me. You said it yourself, Mr. Klutz told Officer Spence. The criminal is always the one you least suspect. The teachers started rattling their cages and shouting. Now that everybody knew Officer Spence was the peanut butter and jelly bandit, we all started booing him. Boo! Throw the book at him, yelled Michael. Put him in the pen, yelled Ryan. Give him the chair, yelled Neil the Nude Kid. But Mr. Klutz held his hand up and made a peace sign. When a grown-up makes a peace sign at our school, it means we have to shut up. Nobody knows why. Why did you do it, Officer Spence? Mr. Klutz asked. Why did you turn to a life of crime? Officer Spence didn't have the chance to finish his sentence because you'll never believe in a million hundred years who came into the all-purpose room at that moment. It was Dr. Brad, the school counselor. Chapter 12, The Truth About Officer Spence. Dr. Brad climbed up on the stage. He's an old guy with frizzy hair and a cane. He talks funny. Ask your mom and dad or teacher to read Dr. Brad's part. It will be hilarious. I know why he did it, Dr. Brad said. Why? Asked Mr. Klutz. I mean, why? Why did he do it? Dr. Brad put his arm around Officer Spence's shoulder. Officer Spence looked all sad. When you were a little boy, you watched the brave policemen on the television and in the movies, yes? Yes, said Officer Spence. They were heroes to you, yes? Yes. And you wanted to grow up and become like one of them, fighting crime, yes? Yes. But the boys and girls at our school are so nice. There is no crime to fight here, yes? So you decided to invent some crime, yes? And then you would be the big hero, yes? Yes, said Officer Spence. He was whimpering now, like a kid who lost his dog or something. Tell me about your childhood, said Dr. Brad. It wasn't happy, no? No. Something bad happened to you when you were a little boy, yes? Yes. It was something with peanut butter, yes? Yes. Mommy wouldn't give you peanut butter, would she? It's true, Officer Spence whimpered. He was totally crying now. Mommy wouldn't let me have peanut butter. All the other kids had peanut butter every day, but my mommy wouldn't give it to me ever. Why? 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 Wow, Dr. Brad should be in the Gifted and Talented program. He had Officer Spence sobbing and blubbering all over the stage, and we got to see it live and in person. Mr. Klutz handed Officer Spence a tissue and he blew his nose into it. Well, I mean, he just blew his nose. If you blew your nose into a tissue, your nose would fall off. You'd have a tissue with a nose in it and a hole in your face. That'd be weird. And how did you feel when Mommy wouldn't give you the peanut butter? Dr. Brad asked. Angry, Officer Spence said. Hurt. I had to eat jelly sandwiches with no peanut butter. I hate jelly sandwiches. All I'd wanted was a little peanut butter on my sandwich. Was that too much to ask? But Mommy wouldn't give it to me. And that is why you took these sandwiches, yes? Yes, I'm sorry, Officer Spence said. I didn't mean to. I won't do it anymore, and I'll stop carving peanut butter sculptures in my basement, too. You carve peanut butter sculptures in your basement? Asked Mr. Klutz. Yuck, disgusting. I thought I was going to throw up. Officer Spence wiped his eyes and blew his nose again. Sheesh, get a grip. That guy's a bigger crybaby than Emily. There, Mr. Klutz said as he gave Officer Spence a hug. Everything is going to be all right. This man does not need to go to jail, said to Dr. Brad. He needs help. We'll get him all the help he needs, said Mr. Klutz. Dr. Brad and Mr. Klutz put their arms around Officer Spence, and together they walked away into the sunset. Well, they didn't really walk away into the sunset. In the movies, people always walk away into the sunset at the end. That would have been cool, except that it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and even though we call it the all-purpose room, watching the sunset isn't one of the purposes. If you're going to have a happy ending, you should always schedule it around sunset in a place where you can actually walk into it. It didn't matter, because that's when the bell rang. It was time to go home. We all rushed out the door, screaming our heads off. My mom was waiting in the car for me because I had to go to the dentist after school. How was school? My mom asked as I got in the car. Fine. Did anything exciting happen today, AJ? I thought about how Officer Spence went crazy and arrested all the grown-ups. I thought about how he put them in cages. I thought about how Mr. Klutz and Mrs. Jaffe broke out of jail and tunneled their way to school with yogurt spoons. I thought about how Dr. Brad made Officer Spence start crying. Nah, I told my mom. Nothing exciting happened. It was a really boring day. Well, I wasn't going to tell her what happened. She would just think I made it all up. That's nice, Mom said as she pulled away from the curb. Oh, by the way, I forgot to pack your peanut butter and jelly sandwich this morning. Here, you can eat it now. Man, that was the best peanut butter and jelly sandwich I ever tasted. Well, that's pretty much what happened. Maybe Officer Spence will stop arresting people and stealing their sandwiches. Maybe we'll get a new security guard who doesn't have peanut butter problems. Maybe Mrs. LaGrange will start a company that sells poodle nasta. Maybe Andrea will get kicked off the principal's advisory committee. Maybe Mrs. Jaffe will get her own book. Maybe a truck full of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches will fall on Andrea's head. Maybe Dr. Brad will stop talking funny. Maybe Mr. Klutz will finally get to eat his yogurt. Maybe Rent-A-Jail will give Officer Spence his money back. Maybe a museum will put his peanut butter sculptures on display. Maybe we'll figure out why so much weird stuff is always happening at our school. But it won't be easy. And that's the end. If you want to take the test on it, the number is 130958. And that was Officer Spence Makes No Sense. I hope you liked it.